Like I need him. Good afternoon again. We're taking this opportunity now to call to order the Joint Senate and House Transportation Committee meeting at the Governor's Transportation Conference. And I am Delegate Dolores McQuinn, and it's been my delight to share and help plan this with, matter of fact, the greatest planner in the Commonwealth of Virginia and maybe the nation for that matter. And that is none other than that's none other than Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, it had certainly been a delight working with you and trying to help get this make the plans for today's event and this actually yesterday and today. And it's been such an innovative and exciting conference as we've had the opportunity to learn about so many various successes in the transportation department and system. And I would like to say that it has not happened just by happen chance. It has been because we have had just such an amazing Secretary of Transportation, none other than Secretary Shannon Valentine. Let's give her a round of applause. Want to thank all of my colleagues who are here today. We appreciate you coming and being a part of this. And I think you'll be very excited about the presentation that will be coming forth as well as the one this afternoon. But just a few moments we're going to go right into, I'm going to pass it on to Senator Morrison. But before that, we just want to give a special shout out and thank you to Secretary Valentine. You have been innovative, progressive, and inclusive in the delivery of services. You have brought everyone along, clearly helping to move this Commonwealth forward in the Transportation Department. You have, the trajectory of the system, transportation system, will particularly go far and continue to go far. You've been legendary, and I'm not just trying to butter you up. I know, and I hear this from so many people, that you're going to be, no, you're a tough act to follow regardless. Okay, so we want to thank you. We're grateful for all that you have done to make Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, a place, like I said, a leader among nations in the transportation system. So we pray that whatever you're going to do as you move forward, that you will continue to prosper in everything you touch. And this is a biblical reference. Everything you touch will prosper. Thank you again for your service. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
I thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
that
I thank
so
you.
much to me, but really, thank you. It takes everyone. We've talked a lot about teamwork and working together at this conference. I never sounded better before, but we've talked a lot about teamwork and how we're able to accomplish what we do, but it does take all of us working together. And I would say that we in the transportation sector really believe that we have a very special partnership with the General Assembly, and we've had it through Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And I really appreciate that kind of support. We would not be able to do what we do without you. And so this afternoon, when you all come over, I think we have something to show you. Oh, you saw it yesterday, Madam Chair, but something to show you about just this time. Governor Northam and I really do believe we are just stewards doing this one time. And anyway, hope to make you all very proud for your investments with us.
Thank you. Thank you again. This time, I would like to turn it over to none other than Senator Morrison.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to have my House colleagues in here, although the cast of characters has changed since I broke in 2006 under Leo Wardrop. That was fun. Leo was a character. It was a great experience, and this is now my, I think, 16th year on the Transportation Committee of one body or another. The first half of our presentations today, before 2 o'clock, when we go to break out and hear from the Capitol Hill folks on the infrastructure bill, which we're all interested in. The first half today is going to be 2 presentations. one on Hyperloop, which their presentation kind of blew me away, as did a film we're going to see afterwards on driverless electric shared vehicles. This is all about the future. Then at 2 o'clock, we're going to deal with the present, and then we're going to talk local after the presentation and what some of the things that are going on. So without further ado, I want to introduce Matt McGuire from Hyperloop TT, I believe it's known as, and he is going to start it off and then kick it off. We're going to have some folks joining us from Zoom from California who are the principals in the organization who will make the presentation to us. So the floor is yours. If you can keep it to around 25 minutes, that'd be great. Then we'll have questions and answers.
Hit this button here.
Yeah.
Hear me better now? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Shelby, can you hear me? Maybe we want to share our slides.
Yes, I can. I actually was hoping, can we move Chuck Michael into the panelist section so that you can see him as well?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm coming to you from California this morning, and Chuck is coming to you from Minnesota. So we have a nice swath of folks in the room. And I believe I can share my screen, Matt. So hold on, stand by for me.
Good stuff.
All right, Matt,
Right.
what are you seeing?
I can see the full slide, so we're good.
Absolutely wonderful. And I see Chuck as well. Do you see him as well?
Yes.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you, Shelby. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everybody here today, and very happy to be here with all of you. So my name is Matt McGuire. I'm excited to introduce you today to our solutions for emission-free passenger and cargo transportation, a solution otherwise known as Hyperloop. Okay, so first please allow me to introduce you to our presenters, one of which you just heard from. Chuck Michael leads our North American feasibility studies team and is our regulatory advisor since early 2015. We also have with us Shelby Phillips, who currently leads our North American public affairs team and has been with Hyperloop TT since late 2015. After the presentation, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So I think we can just go ahead and get started. Okay, so we know that passenger transportation is ready for disruption. And if you think about it, we've experienced, limited innovation over the past 50 years. So at Hyperloop TT, we like to ask, what will define the next era of human mobility? Easy, okay? It's a breakthrough transportation system. One that is not only fast, safe, and easy to use, but one that is efficient both in terms of energy and time. One that uses renewable resources and one that is profitable for its operators. And no, it's not too good to be true. We call it Hyperloop. What you may know is that Hyperloop has been tested with and without humans. Studies have been done across the globe, most notably in the Great Lakes region. And the federal government has embraced Hyperloop with mentions as most recent as the infrastructure bill. So let's check it out.
Imagine a capsule. Imagine a capsule that can carry people. Placed inside a depressurized tube, the air removed to eliminate resistance. Not traveling on rails, but actually levitating above them. Capable of reaching airplane speeds and beyond on the ground. This is a Hyperloop, and it is amazing. Even more amazing, at Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, we haven't been imagining it, we've been building it for the better part of 5 years. And amazing is where we started. We're transforming the passenger experience, putting comfort and safety at the center of everything we're doing. Our reimagined linear electric motor is powered by sustainable solar energy, propelling the capsule on a completely new, incredibly efficient passive levitation system. With these two breakthroughs, our system is capable of giving energy back to the grid. And when something didn't exist, we invented it. Introducing Vibranium, a composite material that monitors speed, capsule integrity, and atmospheric condition in real time, a new benchmark in passenger safety. And we're not done. Our team of over 800 strong, a worldwide intellectual ecosystem of thinkers and problem solvers, tackle each day with the humble goal of changing the world. With its speed and efficiency, the Hyperloop will rewrite the rules of travel and mobility. But that's just one side of the story. There's another side that will have a far greater impact. It's the side that redefines how we connect with one another. Where distant friends become neighbors, countries become neighborhoods. And everybody who inhabits this big, crazy world of ours grows a little closer together. Just imagine that.
At Hyperloop TT, we built our system on 3 pillars. We wanted a transportation system that was efficient both in terms of time savings and profitability, one that was focused on the passenger experience from safety to comfort, and a system that was built for the future and good for the environment. And we've achieved that. Our system reduces noise pollution because it's quiet. It reduces emissions because it carries no fuel on board. It uses renewable energy sources and renewable energy capture technology to reuse what it produces. Hyperloop is likely the most efficient form of transportation ever devised. The chart on the left illustrates the relative efficiency of automobiles, high-speed rail, airplanes, and Hyperloop at various speeds. Generally, the faster a vehicle travels, the less efficient it becomes, primarily due to air resistance or aerodynamic drag. As you see here, the high-speed rail is more efficient than automobiles and airplanes, but they require hundreds of passengers to be economically viable and are speed limited in our view. Aircraft are less efficient even at high altitudes and become even less efficient as their speed increases. But Hyperloop is different, and it is rather counterintuitive because the faster we go, the more efficient we become. This is because magnetic drag, which is the only resistance applicable to a Hyperloop, actually decreases with speed. As for emissions, the graph on the right, this is a very simple one. We have none. And in fact, our Great Lakes Hyperloop feasibility study, CO2 emissions along the corridor between Pittsburgh and Chicago would be reduced by 143 million tons. Plus, with our renewable energy capture technologies, our systems are designed to produce more energy than it consumes, allowing us to put energy back into the grid. We're also building a system that is sustainable and emission-free. We accomplish this by using the tube and vacuum pumps to reduce friction, because when you reduce friction, you reduce the amount of energy you need to power the system. When you use a permanent arrangement of magnets above an unpowered and conductive metal track, you achieve passive magnetic levitation with no energy input, which you saw and explained earlier in the video. This also decreases the amount of electricity that you need to operate the system. And when you can harness energy from natural resources like wind and solar and geothermal, or capture energy from system functions like regenerative braking, you can create a system that is truly sustainable and emission-free. And we have. Recognized for our sustainability work, we recently signed on to the United Nations Global Compact. We're the only Hyperloop company listed among the 12,000 organizations committed to supporting the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So we're building a system that is safe by design, that is autonomously controlled in an enclosed environment, making it immune to weather conditions. It has no grade crossings with traffic or animals, and it deploys sensing and safety innovation technologies. These safety features go hand in hand for us with the passenger experience. We expect to create a seamless passenger experience from beginning to end, infusing comfort and entertainment and providing an augmented physical and immersive digital environment. Plus, with the advancements in real-time monitoring and automated ticketing and security, These all make easy work of contactless travel. We are redefining distance and recognizing the value of your time. Imagine traveling nonstop from DC to Virginia Beach in 25 minutes. A meeting in Raleigh in the morning would have you back in DC for lunch. If you have friends at Fort Bragg, they're only 18 minutes away from Richmond. Not only is travel made more efficient, pleasurable, and cost-effective, but the economic effects of merging these economies will benefit all residents. This is indeed a transport revolution. Imagine a system that costs less to construct, to operate, and to maintain, because in its tube structure and few moving parts, or a system that is profitable with a high rate of return on investment. A remarkable benefit cost ratio, and as we found in our Great Lakes Hyperloop feasibility study, which you'll hear about shortly, we can operate without any government subsidies.
Now, to accomplish a disruption this big requires radical collaboration. We're not going to be able to do it alone. It certainly does take a village. And so at Hyperloop TT, we set out to do things a little differently from the onset. In addition to our 50 employees, which are located around the world in Brazil, France, Spain, the UAE, and of course our headquarters here in Los Angeles, California, we have also engaged over 800 contributors across the globe. These contributors are actually experts in their fields, and they lend their time and their efforts in exchange for becoming stakeholders in our company. These contributors are broken down into 52 interdisciplinary teams. Adding this group to our 50+ world-class partners has really afforded Hyperloop TT to have a presence in 45 countries across the globe. This is a representation of those world-class partners that I just mentioned by category. Many of these companies assist with everything from how we work to what we design, what we engineer, and what we manufacture. Hyperloop TT is a technology innovations company. We hold over 40 patents and other IP. We hold over 60 trademarks, and we are experts in creating technology and applications both in-house and in conjunction with our many partners. As mentioned, we do have a very unique business model, so unique that in fact, in 2017, Harvard Business School did a case study on our crowd-powered ecosystem. And since then, our model of collaboration has been taught in business schools throughout the country. And most recently, at the end of last year, Harvard Business School did another case study to see how we've impacted innovation over the years. And this is now a model, another licensable technology product that we offer. Recently, the World Economic Forum recognized Hyperloop TT as a technology pioneer in the mobility category. We're really proud of our accomplishments within such a short period of time, and we look forward to fulfilling our mission of creating sustainable, carbon-free transportation for today and tomorrow.
Hyperloop technology may seem futuristic, but it's not. It is based on proven technologies, and for this reason, it is only years and not decades away from being materialized. For the past 5 years, we've been working closely with USDOT to create a framework for Hyperloop regulatory criteria. At the same time, we partnered with TÜV Süd, a global testing laboratory, to create generic guidelines for the design, operation, and certification of Hyperloop, and provided these guidelines to the EC and to the USDOT. These efforts resulted in a visit to our Toulouse R&D Center by USDOT management, and not long after that, the creation of the NET Council, the Non-Traditional and Emerging Transportation Technologies Council, a collection of all 9 administrations inside the USDOT. In late 2019, the publication of Pathways to the Future of Transportation that, among other things, assigned Hyperloop to the Federal Rail Administration and provided that Hyperloop was eligible for all grant programs available to railroads. And then in May of this year, our CEO testified before Congress on the benefits of emerging sustainable rail technologies. Our first full-scale system was constructed in Toulouse, France in 2019. This site is fully operational and is our testing center for all components and systems. All testing except for maximum speed is conducted at this location. Let's take a closer look. Welcome to our Research and Development Center in Toulouse, France, the Aerospace Valley of Europe. Here we have assembled our technologies into the world's first full-scale Hyperloop system. We combine our tubes and vacuum systems to reduce the pressure, allowing Hyperloop to safely achieve speeds up to 760 miles per hour. Our full-scale test track is visible in the upper left. On the lower left is our module containing all of the vacuum pumps, controls, and communications. On the upper right is our isolation gate valve that is installed along the corridor, allowing us to close off sections of the tube for access and for maintenance. On the lower right is our passenger capsule on site in Toulouse as we construct the levitation system that will carry the capsule through the tube. Shelby, can you show them one of our latest designs?
I would be happy to. So Hyperloop TT and the Port of Hamburg operator HHLA created a joint venture to leverage Hyperloop technology and leading port automation systems to expand port capacity while reducing carbon emissions and local congestion. These designs are currently under review at various congested ports around the world. And I would love to share a video.
Introducing a new era in cargo transportation. Efficient and autonomous Hyperloop integrated ports, capable of airplane speeds at freight costs. Moving containers hundreds of kilometers in minutes instead of hours with zero emissions. Drastically reducing port congestion, pollution, and footprint. Reclaiming valuable waterfront property and moving ports inland. Resistant to all weather conditions. Transporting 2,800 containers a day on a single line system. A fully connected, sustainable system for balanced logistics. Revolutionizing cross-continental commerce. Welcome to a new era of sustainability, speed, and reliability. Welcome to the Hyperport.
All right, my bad. There we go.
The first comprehensive Hyperloop technical and economic feasibility study in the world was prepared for a corridor connecting Chicago with Cleveland and Pittsburgh. The project was sponsored by the MPO in Cleveland, NOACA, together with the Ohio DOT, Ohio Turnpike Commission, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the Indiana Toll Road, and the Illinois DOT. Through this multi-state collaboration, several potential corridors were identified and evaluated. The feasibility study was completed in December of 2019, prepared by an independent transportation economist, and then underwent a peer review with several universities. This was published in July 2020 as a final version. This was an open book study with all data open and available. Of particular interest was the overall system economics, and the results were amazing, creating over 900,000 person years of employment, a remarkable benefit cost ratio of 2.2, zero operating subsidies, and if privately financed, a return on investment of about 11%. This is all due to an entirely new way to look at high-speed transportation. Lightweight, 28 to 50 passengers per capsule, no heavy locomotives, passive magnetic levitation, and a reduced pressure, secure pathway immune to weather conditions. The tax receipts alone would contribute over $12 billion to local, state, and federal government. No operating subsidies were identified. Another interesting conclusion, by constructing the system in tunnels, much smaller diameter and less expensive than traditional rail and highway tunnels, surface disruption and right-of-way acquisition are no longer issues. The tunnels can be built straight and flat, allowing for Hyperloop to achieve its maximum speed and efficiency. The landowner above still receives payment for use of the subsurface, but will never see it or feel it or likely even think about it.
Okay, so great. Over the last few years, Hyperloop TT has been educating Virginians about Hyperloop and how it can help solve some very pressing issues. Imagine a passenger route that can take you from DC to Norfolk in 24 minutes, or an inland port solution that uses emission-free cargo transportation. Our team plans to continue its ongoing conversations with Virginians for high-speed rail and its work to pass a resolution of support in the state of Virginia. But these are just some ideas. Perhaps you have some. We would love to hear about them. We're going to open the floor to comments and questions here shortly. But first, a special video to close our presentation called Once in a Lifetime. So the Once in a Lifetime short video is about a woman named Henriette and the day she learned about transporting humanity in a new way.
Je m'appelle Henriette Ardouin et j'habite à Bagnères de Luchon. Je suis l'une des femmes les plus âgées de France. J'ai peut-être un peu de compétition. Je suis née avant que les hommes se déplacent rapidement. Je me rappelle des premières voitures. J'ai assisté à la disparition du Hyatt, le mur du son, l'Américain qui a planté le drapeau sur la Lune. Tout ça, je l'ai vécu dans ma vie. On m'a dit qu'il y avait du nouveau bientôt, encore une nouvelle manière de parcourir la Terre. Et on vous emmène dans un tube à 1000 km/h en lévitation. Et ça marche avec l'énergie solaire. L'avion à l'époque aussi, c'était un grand défi. Je me rappelle de mon père. Cet engin ne va jamais décoller du sol. Cette machine, vous l'avez construite, n'est-ce pas? C'est quoi son nom déjà? Hyperloop TT.
Okay, so I think we'd like to take this opportunity just to open it up for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. I spoke today, and he's going to be addressing us for about 10 minutes at 3 o'clock today when we return, our new port director. And we were talking about Hyperloop and what a game changer it would be to have freight be able to move to the Front Royal Inland Port in a half an hour to open up the 81 corridor to the improvements that we're currently undergoing, but be able to get containerized freight to that port, and or think about, a day at the beach instead of for people in Washington, DC going to Ocean City or Rehoboth, we can go to Virginia Beach. What a game changer this kind of thing would be for our economy in Virginia. The question is, at some point in time, will we have the courage to lead and try to find a solution with our partners in the federal government, the military, because they are interested in getting to the military installations. My understanding is in Virginia Beach and Norfolk and in the Hampton area. And at the same time, getting to Fort Bragg in North Carolina. This is the stuff of dreams, but right here, as all of you know, this was a dream. There's more technology or more capacity for computing here than what put a man on the moon in 1969. Dwight Eisenhower in 1918, as a captain in the United States Army, had some time, and he decided to hook on to a trip across country. They were trying to find out how long it would take a military convoy to get from Washington, DC to the West Coast. It was a nightmare. It took 3 weeks for them to do that motorized. And it always stuck with him. And at the end of World War II, when he saw the Autobahn and how it worked in Germany, he started to make those connections. So when the interstate highway system was proposed, we had a president on board and ready to go. And this may seem futuristic, but it is disruptive technology. And as you'll learn in the next video, we're going to be seeing when we're finished with question and answers here, once disruptive technology hits 10x, the gentleman who's going to be presenting this film states that he's been studying it since the 1400s. Anytime something hits 10x, 10 times more efficient, 10 times more effective, it happens every time. And usually the legacy industries miss it because they're doing too well. It's always the forward thinkers and the entrepreneurs who make these things happen. With that, I'll open the floor to any questions you have for Matt and his team.
Ms. Murphy, I think you had a question.
Well, I'm just curious as to how deep underground this has to go. I mean, is it like a subway? Could it go through New York City? Or is it just for different kinds of travel, not in the city?
Chuck, do you want to take that one? Chuck and Shelby probably will be taking the majority of the questions here, but Chuck, do you want to take that one?
If I understand the question right, it's a question of whether this is local in a city or intercity between different city pairs. Was that the question?
No, well, Ms. Murphy was asking about how deep would we need to have the Hyperloop go underground? And could it go under New York City as an example, similar
Absolutely.
to the subway?
Yeah, absolutely. It can go underground. We can go, several hundred feet. You want a minimum depth, like through a farm field or something, of about 50 feet or so. But the new tunneling technologies that are coming about, tunneling traditionally has been very expensive and very labor intensive. The newer technologies are all robotic. They take the spoils and they recycle them. It's much more cost effective now to build tunnels than it's ever been. And it's also an advantage where you don't disrupt the surface. As we go into downtown Chicago, or it could be New York City, there's no way that you could get a major transportation system into the inner city. And now we can go underground, just like the DC Metro. Very similar.
Interesting.
Thank you. Senator Evan.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering, is this entirely privately paid? You said you weren't seeking government subsidies. And also I was wondering what the rationale is on how far apart the stations would be, because in your example, you showed New York, you showed DC, Richmond, and I think Virginia Beach. But I'm wondering, is this something that you wouldn't want to stop in, like, say, Fredericksburg? Does it make it less efficient? Just how far apart is an ideal station, or what's too close?
Each of the stations are what we call offline stations. So you would take like an exit ramp and you would go into the station. The through traffic, that traffic that doesn't stop, would whiz right on by you. So you could have a station wherever there is sufficient demand for that station. In terms of the subsidies and the government participation, There's really two major phases to these types of projects. One is the permitting and the front end work, and the other is the construction and the operation. The private sector is able to take the business risk for the design, construction, and operation. The challenge is the risk during the front end work on the environmental side. How long does an environmental process last? And the private sector doesn't have any real control over that, because that, in this case, it would go through the USDOT. And it could last a short period of time. It could last a long period of time. So that's where the collaboration comes in and participation, so that everybody has a seat at the table, the USDOT and the local government units, as well as the project developer.
Thank you. Delegate Rum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I have about 3 questions to ask here. First one on this is, can you, if you can elaborate on the right-of-way acquisition in particular? What I'm particularly interested in is, if you're going to be dealing either underground or above ground with this, would you more or less try to follow existing, highways, existing other, public access areas, so that you're causing that least disruption, even if it's going to be tunneled in a way where we're being told that most people won't be able to feel it or notice it above ground? You will inevitably have issues when you're getting into well and septic fields. You're going to inevitably get into issues where you're having, basically on private property where you have basically things that go several hundred feet below ground, especially when you're drilling into an aquifer, for example. So I guess the first thing is, could you explain the right-of-way acquisition and how that relates to our current transportation system?
Let's start with the elevated system. So it would be built elevated on pylons. It would probably be, say, 30 feet off the ground or so. But what would be necessary there is an easement for the supports, an easement for the pylons. I don't see a need to acquire the land in fee simple or anything like that, but just an easement. And the landowner would be entitled to payment and an easement for that. If it's a tunnel situation, the landowner still has rights below the surface. So they're entitled to an easement, they're entitled to payment for that. Back to the other question in terms of the public right-of-way, it's much easier if there's a very straight highway system that we can go underneath that, simply because the landowner the number of landowners is much less. If you're dealing with a state DOT, you can have a single arrangement. You may meander in and out of the public right-of-way, because the roads, when you're going that fast, the roads aren't as straight as you think they are. So we really need to minimize the curves. So if there's a highway system, we go outside the right-of-way, then we would visit with the landowner and look for easements there. In terms of the underground infrastructure, it could be wells, it could be any number of things, foundations. I think we would go comfortably below all of that. We would know where the wells are at. If we go through an area like that, we would be able to miss it and not interrupt any of their well drilling operations. But for the most part, we're well below that, well below foundations. And if you're underground, it's like a blank canvas. If you find an obstacle, you simply move over a little bit and do the best you can to not interrupt anybody's business.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Second question, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second question deals regarding safety. Basically, so if you have a system here where you're dealing with what we were just told was basically flight speed on the ground, more or less, you would have to have some sort of control for the number of pods, I guess in that case, that are actually moving through the system. And especially if you have interconnecting pods, so that, let's say if you're coming from Cleveland to Virginia Beach versus DC or Virginia Beach, right? There's going to be a point where those, either intersect, or you're going to have to run parallel or concurrent or something else, different sort of infrastructure, which is of course going to take even more right-of-way acquisition in order to do. And so that would clearly not be the most economical way to do it. So can you basically just talk about how you're more or less going to try to prevent accidents and prevent systemic failures that would have catastrophic events?
Certainly. It's important to maintain a minimum distance between all of the capsules. It's what we call headway. So our headway is on the order of 2 minutes, and it could be as little as 40 seconds. But when you get it, it's a non-negotiable distance. You need that safety between the two. What governs that, what manages that, is the control system. And I mean, if you talk about data and big data, this is really big data when you look at controlling systems like this with maybe hundreds of capsules going in a tube that are just seconds apart. It's really important to have the best operating system you can. We have a partner, Hitachi Rail is our partner, and they're designing this system. They're really not designing from scratch. They've been using it for high-speed rail systems all over the world for a long time. So now we're modifying it to recognize the speed of Hyperloop, which is different than the high-speed rail, as well as the safety distance between. If you have an upset condition, and there's several of those that would occur, but the system is designed, and the safety protocols are that you stop the capsule wherever you're at. And that would mean that you stop everyone ahead of you or behind you. But that's okay, because the idea is to maintain the safety. There are exits from the capsule. If you're in the tube, there's a vacuum around you. And we have openings where we repressurize the tube. Remember the gate valve that I showed in one of the slides? We close the gate valve, we repressurize the tube, we open the doors, and the passengers, if they're standing still, if the capsule is not moving, the passengers can get out and there's an emergency egress from the tube. If it's a minor malfunction, we'll simply go to the next station, take the off-ramp into the station, and allow the passengers to get off there, and we repair whatever the system may be. But if there's a catastrophic issue, and that would be like a breach of the tube, and that's something that we model too. What happens then is it's a vacuum, so you have a wall of air coming at you, and as you model all of this and you look at the mass of the air and all the details, what happens is that it pushes the capsule and you come to a stop, and that's it. When we come to a stop, there are landing wheels. It comes down on the wheels, and you simply stop in the guideway, and then you get some help from somebody.
Very good. Thank you. Delegate Rome, you had a third question?
Yeah, the last one is just about affordability. And because I noticed that the one part on there that you all were addressing was dynamic pricing, more or less, which is something that we see, especially here in Northern Virginia. Whether it's a 66 tolls, I think, inside the Beltway is a clear example on that. So basically, how affordable is this going to be, more or less, for just our constituents in general, regardless of their income?
That's a good question. Thank you. There's some interesting economics that come to play in that question. Hyperloop handles not only passengers, but it carries light freight, time-sensitive, high-value freight. We can carry, like an air cargo container would fit inside. When you ship high-value cargo, many times it's by air, and you'll pay a great deal of money, and so many dollars per ton mile to transport that. As an example, it costs about $4.50 to transport something like that in air cargo priority. In Hyperloop, our cost is about 10 cents. So what you have there is a margin, and it's a question of how you use that margin. And the best way, in our view, is to make an extremely equitable fare system. So it could be that if you pay full fare, maybe it's the price of a bus ticket, because the operating costs are extremely low. But then you can have fares for students and senior citizens and disabled people and all kinds of other situations, group rates, frequent riders. But this margin gives the ability to design an equitable fare structure so that even in some cases, it could be a free ride. Maybe students get a free ride.
Thank you. Delegate Senator Favola, I believe you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really certainly innovative and cutting edge. But my question is sort of twofold. Do you see this Hyperloop actually coexisting with our current forms, our multimodal forms of transportation now? or do you see it as a replacement? And if you do see it as a replacement, what are the planning steps that a jurisdiction or a state would really need to do if we were going to replace, say, I don't know, our current bus system or our metro system or our railroad system? I mean, those are pretty established forms of transportation. There are a lot of stakeholders. So I'd just be curious how you expect jurisdictions to manage change if this is going to be a complete replacement. And you don't have to answer now. You can think about it. Or
I would, if I could, I'd like to answer because it's a fantastic question, and it has two parts really. When we design a station, it would be a multimodal station where we integrate this with existing transportation systems, because we're not going to replace anything. The only thing we would replace is something else that goes 700 miles per hour, and there's really nothing that's there. Even Amtrak, it exists quite well with Amtrak. What we do is we give you an express route. Maybe it's between Boston and New York, and that there wouldn't be that many stations because there's already stations for Amtrak and other transportation systems, but it's an intercity system. And it's based on demand. This isn't a schedule system at all. When the capsule's full, it goes, and you don't really need a reservation. You just go to the station, get on, and away it goes. So it's not really replacing anything. It's just speeding up the average rate of transportation around the country.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Watts, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any concern in the magnetic propulsion about the exotic metals that may not be available readily?
There's two questions there. One is the magnetic field, and as you look at the details, all the magnetic field is directed down. And there are some exotic metals in there. You could make it from exotic metals. From the magnets themselves, we can make recycled magnets without getting into the rare earth mining and the limited aspect of that. So we can manufacture these, and that's one of the new pieces of the supply chain that you'll see emerge with these, is because right now there's not a great market for that because no one uses brand new, recycled magnets, but that in the entire supply chain will see significant change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Thank you. This is a game changer. The question isn't when these things occur, it's how you get there. And what are the steps that you have to go through? And is it national? Is it regional? Is it state? Is it local? Bringing all of those entities together. But point to point, a lot of it, I think, early on would probably, my guess is, does it make sense to get to an airport an hour and a half early to get a flight to Virginia Beach from Washington? Or does it just make more sense to, and then fly there, or just get in a car and go? It is, it will still probably make more sense to go from DC to Los Angeles by air, at least for the foreseeable future. But this is kind of an iterative process, I guess, that, you do the things that make the most sense the first, that are the most economically sustainable, that provide a return on investment so that investors can continue to invest in the expansion of an organization like this. But we really appreciate you being here today to open our minds to what may happen, because the future of transportation may not be what we think. We tend to think that everything is kind of iterative and linear, and then we make these minor improvements. But disruptive technology has never been that way. Disruptive technology are giant leaps that change the game, and we've certainly seen that in our lifetimes. And the young lady from France and everything that she has witnessed is just, been extraordinary. And time goes by in the blink of an eye. And next thing you know, the future is here. And it's good to know what the possibilities are. And we very, very much appreciate Hyperloop taking the time to be here today. It's been great working with you, Matt. Thank you very, very
Senator.
much.
Thank
And
very
thank you,
much,
those
Senator.
of you in California and Minneapolis. We really appreciate your doing it. Very well done presentation, very informative and eye-opening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Could
Thank
I
you.
just simply add too, it was a lot of information to cover in a 20-minute period of time. So if you are interested, we are certainly welcome, are happy to send a little more information to any of your offices. And also, I think it's important, one last little thing, Hyperloop TT is a licensing company. So what that means for us is that we're not operating or building or maintaining. We're going to leave that to the experts. So when we start talking about combining and intermodal, we can work with airlines, we can work with railroads. We actually think they're going to make great partners for us because who better to operate a system than somebody who's been doing it for 100 years. So I think these are all some things we didn't get to talk to about today. So we look forward to some future conversations. And again, thank you for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you so much and really appreciate it. Let's a lot to think about, especially for our younger members. It is
Mind-boggling for the older members.
yeah, that's it. It is it's interesting. Someone had a question or?
No, I was just wanting to say Delegate Bagby wouldn't have to do horse and buggy any longer.
That's, that is the case. No, Delegate Bagby is known as a forward-thinking, progressive delegate. And, but, we talked and some of the questions that were answered, that this is sort of a point-to-point kind of thing. But what do you do when you get there? What do you do when you get to New York City on a train? You get in a cab, you get in a bus, you walk, you do whatever. But that's what they're talking about in terms of the partnerships. And I think the same thing can be done here, but maybe even the last mile is going to change. Maybe even that's going to be different. And that's what our next video is about. It's about disruptive technology and how it's inevitable. And it deals with driverless electric shared vehicles. And this is the other half of the equation. Once we get to Virginia Beach, once we get to Fort Bragg, what do we do then? How do we get where we're going to go? We don't have a car with us. We didn't backpack a bicycle. Let's take a look at the future. This film is about 3 years old, and it's probably a little bit, maybe you could say out of date because things are changing so quickly. But the idea here is to look again at the possibilities and what can happen when we think in a forward-thinking fashion, and the fact that we already have a great road infrastructure in place and how we can use it more efficiently. So with that, if we could play the video.
Next up, please welcome Tony Sipa from Clean Disruption Inc., here to talk to us about why energy and transportation will be obsolete by 2030.
Thank you, Robin Hood. Thank you so much, and thanks you all for being here tonight. I am going to take you to the future of energy and transportation, but before I do that, I'm going to take you into the past. New York City, we are in New York, Easter Parade, 1900. We used horses as our main means of transportation for thousands of years. There is one car in this picture, one car in a sea of horses. Can anyone see the one car in that picture? There. One car. 13 years later, just 13 years in a sea of cars, can anyone see the one horse in that picture? That's all it took, 13 years for New York to go from all horse minus one to all cars. This is more than a century ago. This is the very definition of a technology disruption. So what is a technology disruption? It's when new products and services create new markets, and right then and there, or eventually, they radically transform industries or actually collapse that conventional industry. And one of the things that are interesting about disruptions is that tastes and preferences change very quickly. So what happened to all those horses that were disrupted? We ate them. I mean, not we, not you or me, but essentially they became fashionable as meat, right? And that's what happened. Tastes and preferences change, and even pet food was made with horse meat for a long time, for decades. That's in America. So I'll take you to 1985, when the then largest telecom company on earth, then largest, hired McKinsey to answer one question. In 15 years, what's going to be the adoption of this new thing called the cell phone? 15-year projection, McKinsey. Their answer was 900,000. In the year 2000, AT&T, you're going to have 900,000 subscribers. The actual number was 109 million subscribers. This is not a small mistake, right? This is a factor of 120 times, right? My little dog could have done better and not charged as much, right? But you know, the thing is that it is usually experts and insiders and mainstream analysts who dismiss disruption opportunities. Really, really smart people with a lot of data or access to a lot of data. I mean, the cover of Forbes magazine in November 2007 said, "Can anyone stop Nokia?" What else happened in 2007? Right? I'll talk about that. But even now, the smartest company, industrial company in America, basically GE lost 70+%. I mean, some of you may have lost some money because they thought that natural gas and nukes and so on were going to keep growing for a couple of decades. And GE power got wiped out. And that is the idea, what I call market trauma, right? And I'll define that in a second, but here's the question that I've asked myself for 15 years. Why do smart people in smart companies consistently dismiss market opportunities and disruption? Consistently. So I have been working to create a framework to understand technology going forward, because history is interesting, but it's not very useful if you're an investor or you're a corporate executive, right? And I'll walk you quickly through some of the important things. One is, of course, technology. Every single technology has a cost curve. It improves every year at different rates, and that's what makes them interesting. We know about Moore's law, but do we know at which rate data storage or DNA sampling, so every technology has its own cost curve. But technologies alone don't enable disruptions. You know, the other thing to take into account is S-curves. We see a lot of linear projections, but every single adoption in history, and when I say history, I mean history, 10,000 years, has been adopted as S-curve. Never as a line, always as an S-curve. Now, this is color television, but you know, transportation is not color television, right? So I went back to the horses and the cars to see how that adoption happened, and it went from essentially nothing to 95% of the market in 20 years. In America, 20 years. But here's the most interesting part. From 11%, the tipping point, to about 80%, happened in just 10 years. That's it. While we built two brand new industries, oil and auto, while we built a whole new road transportation system, and while we fought a major war. And the disruption still happened in 10 years. So any excuse that transportation disruption cannot happen in 10 years is not looking at the evidence of what really has happened. And all S-curves are actually accelerating. I mean, if you think that the market is accelerating and things are changing faster and faster, it's because it is. Now, in weeks or months, you're sideswiped in your history because S-curves are getting faster and faster. Now, technology in and of itself is not what causes disruption, it's convergence. So in 2007, the smartphone that you have, both Apple and Google came up with the smartphone in 2007. Now, why not 2005 or 2009? Why not, right? That's because all the technologies that made a $600 smartphone possible happened in 2007. So anybody could have done it. Nokia could have done it, remember them? Motorola could have done it, remember them? But another lesson is, A, the convergence, but the other one is disruptions happen from the outside. Neither Google nor Apple had ever built a phone before. So why them? Because disruptions happen from the outside. Business model innovation is every bit as disruptive as technology itself. We know all about Uber, right? They were started 2009, and within 7 years, they had more bookings than the whole taxi industry in America. In 7 years, from an apartment in San Francisco to more bookings than the whole taxi industry, right? Within 8 years, Uber and Lyft had 20% of the VMTs, of the vehicle miles traveled, in several cities, including San Francisco. 8 years, talk about a disruption. And the disruption is not just taxis. We are seeing a peak in new car sales, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that we're opting to not buy new cars already, right? So I had predicted peak car by 2020, and of course I was called insane. Guess what? This year, India, car sales went down. America went down. Europe went down, and China went down. I may have been off by a year early, right? Peak car is already here, and market trauma is the idea that, you know, you hear, oh, it's gonna take a long time, a decade or 2 decades for, you know, whatever, solar or batteries or whatnot, to become mainstream. That may well be the case, but the financial impact can happen right away. So if you lost money on GE, that's called market trauma, right? That's because the financial impact can happen right away because of disruptive technologies. 2-3% market penetration, gone, right? And that's what happens to a lot of companies. So what are the key technologies that I'm looking at that in my work, I think are gonna essentially disrupt all sectors in the 2020s, every single last one of them. These technologies, now this is not comprehensive enough, but I'm just one person, right? And you know, I'll talk about using this framework and these technologies to understand how transportation and energy will be disrupted. I'll focus on transportation. So in 2014, 5+ years ago, I published a book called Clean Disruption, where I made a lot of what then were considered pretty insane predictions. And I'll go over that. But these are the 4 technologies plus 1 business model that are disruptive in and of themselves. But when you converge those technologies, essentially they're super disruptive. And by 2030, they're going to wipe out conventional energy and transport as we know it. So I'm going to walk you through that. Batteries is the number 1. I mean, not the most important, but the first technology. And this is exactly the cost curve that I published 5.5 years ago. And of course, I was called insane. It's not going to go down by 80% in 5 years, I was told many times. They were right. It's gone down by 90%. I mean, it's gone down actually much faster. And that's because of a number of things, right? And what happens when the cost curve is like that? You know, if you take the example of Australia, in South Australia, the biggest battery on the grid back then, now it's not the biggest one anymore, but that battery was just 2% of that market, 2%. Within weeks, it wiped out 90% of the revenues in that market from the ancillary services providers. Weeks, that's market trauma, right? Just a 2% market penetration, done, right? That's disruption for you. So my prediction has been that first, batteries plus solar and wind are going to disrupt or have already disrupted ancillary services. Then peakers, I made the prediction that by 2020, peakers are going to be obsolete, gone, no more peakers, right? And then baseload. And when is that baseload going to happen? Soon enough, right? Now, when the battery costs come down, that enables another disruption, EVs. And so the question is the EV disruptive, or is it a greeny, commie conspiracy against oil companies? And of course, the other question is, who can afford an electric vehicle? Not me. I mean, look at my suit, 10-year-old picture, same suit. I don't even own a car, let alone an EV, right? But is the EV disruptive? Well, I'll give you many reasons. I can give you many reasons, but I'll just walk you through a few. One is that on a per mile basis, EVs are 10 times cheaper to power than internal combustion engine automobiles or trucks or whatever. An EV has 20 plus moving parts versus 2,000 plus for an internal combustion engine. EVs have exactly zero maintenance or near zero. And that's why companies can give infinite mile warranty, because they can. And this is something that you won't hear a lot still in mainstream analysis, which is that EVs drive 500,000 miles plus, and that makes them super disruptive. Of course, they say individuals only drive 10,000 miles a year. Why is, I mean, it would take us 50 years to drive an EV, right? I mean, who drives a car for 50 years? Unless you live in Cuba, right? But if you're a fleet, it is interesting because fleets go 100,000 miles per year. Over 5 years, if you're Uber or Lyft or Amazon, 100,000 miles per year means over 5 years, you need 1 EV or 3 internal combustion engine automobiles or vans. So it becomes interesting if you are a fleet. And that's exactly what's going on. So what is the electric vehicle cost curve? And this is exactly what I published in 2014. And, you know, essentially I said by early 2019, the market is going to have an unsubsidized 200-mile electric vehicle for $35,000 by early 2019. Thank you, Tesla, right? I mean, it's happened exactly on the money, as I predicted. Of course, back then I was insane. Now, of course, everybody knows it. But if you continue that cost curve, what that cost curve says is that by 2025, all vehicles are going to be electric. All cars, all trucks, all vans, for purely economic reasons. Because by 2025, we're going to have $10,000 EVs with 200-mile range. Done. No more gasoline vehicles or diesel. 2025, right? Is that happening? Well, it is. I mean, go to China and you can already start seeing the $15,000 to $20,000 EVs with 300-kilometer range. So Amazon, a company not known for being green, but for being green, just ordered 100,000 vans starting 2021 on the dot, as I predicted, because it makes economic sense. 100,000 vans. New business model also. Now, autonomous vehicles. You know, you hear a lot about autonomous vehicles. Everyone, seemingly, OEMs are investing in autonomous technology, not just Silicon Valley companies. Everyone. Tens of billions of dollars going into this market. Why? Right? By the way, all you need is one autonomous vehicle. So autonomous technology is an operating system. If you consider the history of computing, operating systems, all you need is one. It's like a spouse. All you need is one, right? You know, essentially, Apple did not wait for anybody else to launch iOS, right? They just launched it. And the other lesson is that in the end, because of network effects, two companies are going to own 90+% of the market. So Android and iOS, Windows and Mac, and so on and so forth. There's a third, maybe, like Linux, but that's it. I mean, no more than that. And all you need is one company to get level 4, not 5, level 4, which is geofenced, in order for this market to happen. Now, Waymo just ordered 62,000 cars to be launched in 2020 and 21 already, right? Are they that interesting that they're already buying cars, right? Billions of dollars. Now, how expensive are they going to be? Isn't autonomous technology expensive? I'm going to show you the cost curve of supercomputing, which is what you need for autonomous technology. This is the world's largest supercomputer, most powerful supercomputer in the year 2000. It was almost $50 million for 1 teraflops, 1 trillion operations per second. 50 million, 1 teraflops. By 2016, you could buy 8 teraflops, which is more or less what you need for level 4, for $600 bucks. That's an improvement of, nearly 1 million times, right? 1 million times improvement. And if you have an Apple 10, you already have 5 trillion operations per second for free. Done, right? For free. You can get basically the equivalent of $250 million of supercomputing, which is why companies like NVIDIA and Tesla and so on are developing multi-hundred trillion operation per second computing, right? Because that's what you need. But if there's anything that I want you to walk away with is this: artificial intelligence, learning, is improving not just exponentially, but double exponentially. Both the hardware and the software are improving exponentially. So the combination is double exponential. And this is an example, what Google Mind, DeepMind did with Go. I mean, in 3 years, that's all it took them to go from playing 80s games to beating the European champion at Go. You could not do that before. 3 years. Within 5 months, they beat the world champion, which is an order of magnitude smarter, right, than the European champion, within months. And then they took that, they shelved it, they restarted, they rebooted with just the rules of the game. No human knowledge, just the rules of the game. Within 3 days, they beat the version that beat the world champion by 100 games to 0. AI is improving at double exponential rates. Anybody who tells you we're going to wait 10 years for level 4 autonomy, I don't know if they get this double exponential. And when I say autonomous technology, I mean it for everything that moves on wheels. Anything that moves on wheels is going to be autonomous. So what is the disruption? The disruption is the 3 technologies, the 2 technologies plus the business model innovation. That convergence. So let's assume it's going to happen in 2021, that we're going to have level 4 autonomous technology that is ready and is approved by a regulator somewhere. So just to be clear, this is called transport as a service, and it's autonomous electric and on-demand transportation owned by fleets, not individuals, owned by fleets. The day that autonomous technology is approved, so imagine Uber, autonomous and electric. The day that's approved, the cost per mile of TaaS is going to be 10 times cheaper than the cost of owning a car. That day. So essentially that day, the decision that someone is going to have to make is, do I want to spend $50,000 to buy a car over the next 5 years, or do I want a $100 subscription to Uber or Lyft? No brainer. Every time there's been a 10x cost, there's been a disruption, and a quick one at that. Every time in history. And TaaS is going to be not just cheaper than buying a new car, it's going to be up to 4 times cheaper than the operating costs of a car that you already own. So you may not get rid of that right away, but you will eventually. So if that happens, right, and Tesla just, years later, they said, this is our business model, and exactly, what I predicted. They're saying 18 cents per mile. My prediction was 10 to 20 cents. So it's within the right range for transport as a service. So if this happens 2021, then by 2030, 95% of miles in America are going to be autonomous, electric, and on-demand. 95% for purely economic reasons. Not because of governments, for purely economic reasons, because it's going to be 10 times cheaper than a gasoline car or even an EV that's individually owned. Now, the implications of all of this are stunning, and I'm going to walk you through some of them. 2021. Now, if level 4 happens 2023, it's a shorter time frame, right? 2021 would be a 10-year disruption. It could be shorter if level 4 is approved later. Implications. Peak car would happen around the time, basically the year before level 4 is approved, right? Because nobody's going to buy a car except for fleets. So it's going to crash new car sales. The US vehicle fleet is going to shrink by about 80% because we're going to have cars running around 100,000 miles per year, not being parked. I mean, we park our cars 96% of the time. I mean, that's a useless use of space. So the fleet's going to shrink by 80%. The other implications, financial. Every American family, by not owning a car and instead getting a subscription, is going to save about $6,000 per year. $6,000 in our pockets per year. I already have it, by the way, I don't own a car. And what that means for the economy is $1 trillion increase in disposable income. $1 trillion. Now, that would be the biggest boost in the economy ever in history. And on top of that, because we're not going to drive and we're going to do other stuff while not driving, that's an additional $1 trillion in economic gains. $2 trillion boost to the economy. Social. 10 cents per mile means you can go anywhere within 10 miles for $1. Essentially, we're going to see Starbucks on wheels offering free. I mean, this is free transportation. That means mobility for all, everyone. For the poor, for the young, for the old, for the retired. We don't need to own cars. We have access to pretty much everything. A lot of jobs exist that could be filled by people who are at least an hour to 90 minutes away. And this would give them access to those jobs, right? Because a fleet of 80% fewer cars, no traffic, right? Traffic gone, at least the way that we know it. 90% decrease in greenhouse emissions. 90%. It's not going to cost us money. We're actually getting money back, thank you very much, to go 90% lower greenhouse gas emission. And this does not take into account cleaning the actual power generation side. 90% less greenhouse gases. Traffic accidents, we're going to save at least 1 million lives per year. I mean, cars are death machines, right? We kill 1.2, 1.3 million people every year, and we send 40, 50 million people to the hospital every year. That is going to go, right, with self-driving cars. Implications for the oil industry, essentially, oil is going to peak. Again, assume 2021, when level 4 is approved, 2020 will be the peak at 100 million barrels per day, and it's going to go down to about 70 by 2030. So it's going to be a 30% drop within 10 years, but price, remember market trauma, as we have heard, as we know from 2014-15, all you need in oil markets is a 2 million barrel oversupply for prices to crash from 100 to 20. And we've seen this. So we estimate that oil, as soon as 2021 or 2, will crash to about $25. $20, $25. Boom. And it's not coming back. It's not coming back. What does that mean? If you cannot compete at 2025, you're gone. Any asset that can't compete at 20 or 25, gone, right? Stranded. And that means deep water, shale, and oil sands, gone, right? And that includes not just lifting, but also all the associated infrastructure with those types of oil. I mean, a CEO of a major oil company told me, I'm getting ready for oil at 15, having studied this. I mean, I'm saying 25, but you know, once you get this, some folks are getting ready for that. Implications for construction and real estate. So we park our cars 96% of the time. Did I say that? Yeah. When we have fleets that are going around, driving 100,000 miles per year, not needing to park, we're going to have 80 to 90% of the parking infrastructure is going to free up. That means a third of the landmass of American cities is going to free up that is used today for parking. A third of the landmass. Houston, much more than that. You know, Fort Worth, 40%. LA, 40, 50%, right? Now, I did the numbers for Los Angeles, and with the parking that's freed up, you could build 3 cities the size of San Francisco in LA. 3 cities the size, parking and everything, Golden Gate Park and everything, right, in LA. So our cities, our society, I mean, it's the time now to start thinking, what do we do with that third of landmass that's going to open up in our cities within 10 years, right? Because this is the time to choose. Do we want green space? Check. Do we want more business? Check. Do we want affordable housing? Check, right? A third. We have not had that opportunity in 100 years to rebuild our cities. And this means a massive multi-trillion-dollar construction boom because of all this freed up space. And when we build new, I mean, anyone who knows, you know, who's seen what's going on in California or what's happened in the cold winters or in the South when we get hurricanes and whatnot, knows that we need a new grid. Now, the interesting thing is that when you combine rooftop solar plus batteries plus smart infrastructure, you can get both lower costs and more resilience, both. We don't have to choose anymore. So David's going to talk about solar, but essentially we're at the point where solar on the rooftop is already cheaper, not just than grid, it's cheaper than the cost of transmission, meaning that even if you generate at zero, a rooftop solar plus batteries is in everybody's selfish best economic interest, right? And also, it gives us more resilience. And on top of that, a 200-mile EV has enough juice for 2 days of electricity of the average American home, right? And now we can't, I mean, we could power our homes with our cars. We just can't do it now because of regulation. So let me take you back to the future. From horses to cars, and now we're going from cars to transport as a service. We are here in 2019, and we're essentially driving typewriters on wheels. And if you don't know what a typewriter is, I've made my point, right? That's what we're driving right now. And they're gonna be disrupted, wipe out, just like typewriters were. Within 10 years, we're gonna be transformed in terms of transport, energy, and our cities are gonna be radically transformed, and it's gonna happen within 10 years. And I'll leave you with one thought. This is not an energy transition. This is a technology disruption. It's not gonna happen because of governments. It's gonna happen despite governments. It's not gonna cost money. We're gonna get money back. Thank you so much.
Well, interesting information. And for those of you who wanted to know, that I was introduced to Tony Seba and his videos by that wild liberal progressive Jim Beamer from Dominion Power.
Thank you so much for that kind.
And so, this is, we've now talked about moving from city to city, place to place, and now your last mile is very different. What's exciting to me about this, I've spent the last 20 years going around the country dealing with youth violence, violence reduction, and going into big cities like Detroit, for instance, 2.5 times the size of the District of Columbia with a smaller population. It's the Motor City. They never figured transit into anything that they did. These kids are trapped in terrible neighborhoods, in dangerous neighborhoods. They have to go through extensive efforts just to patrol the streets so these kids can get to school safely. They walk by dilapidated and destroyed houses. They drive by, or they walk by empty lots with 10-foot high vegetation where they don't know who's in there and who's going to hurt them. And now you have a situation where you can have these kids be able to get away, to be able to get out, to be mobile, to know what middle-class kids in the suburbs know, that kind of freedom to get around. And for those of our members here who are in rural districts, I had a presentation recently from Francis Electric. They're trying to duplicate what they're doing in Oklahoma. They want to do it here in Virginia. And I had them connect up to Terry Kilgore, who had been the chairman of the Commerce and Labor Committee. And they want to make sure that they're taking a long-term view of return on investment. And they want to make sure that there is a charging station that you can recharge a car, supercharged in 20 minutes within every 50 miles in rural Virginia. This is a company that's already talking about the changes that are going to take place. So with that, I would like to temporarily recess this meeting. We'll come back here after the 2 o'clock presentation in the big room, where some folks from Capitol Hill who wrote the infrastructure bill are going to present on what that's all about. And so we're going from the future to the very present. And then we'll come back here and hear quickly from the new port director and a video on difficult to serve and underserved people in transit in Virginia, put on by the GRTC, thanks to our friends in Richmond. And then if we have any time left, we'll do a quick spin around the room to see, hear from everybody what their most current transportation need is. So with that, the meeting is temporarily recessed, and we'll be back here a little bit after 3. Thank you. And always good to go to some place where people are trying to give us money. And that is a great thing. Just a couple of quick announcements on transportation. We just got word here just the other day that the Metro to Dulles expansion, the Silver Line, is substantially completed. And as you know, a few years back, we had to put $50 million to get the enplaning costs at Dulles Airport down to be so that they were competitive with National Airport, Reagan, and especially with BWI in Baltimore, who has the lowest enplaning costs. And now with the opening of the Silver Line, hopefully the number of passengers they have will increase and reduce that enplaning costs. And so hopefully our bridge investment of that $50 million will pay off, and we'll have we'll get the airport more vibrant and cost efficient. The other thing I wanted to announce, Delegate Reed and myself are on something that is called the Council of Governments Metropolitan Area Transportation Planning Board. And we meet monthly by Zoom, and it's got everybody in the world in it from DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And we all have weighted votes. And believe it or not, our project, what we have done in Northern Virginia with the express lanes on the Beltway, has been extraordinary and made a real difference to moving people and cars in our region. And Maryland and DC actually voted in such a way that it killed the parallel project, which would replace the American Legion Bridge on Interstate 495 there going into Maryland. And they, were not going to have the express lanes that would take you up to I-270. But a month later, we had a revote, a lot of work got done, and that is now going to happen. And so it will connect up with what's called the next project on the Beltway in the Tyson's Corner area of Virginia. And for the first time, we will be able to connect to Bethesda, Maryland. That's a huge thing for those of you who have to travel to Northern Virginia and are frustrated with the traffic, and especially when you have to transit into Maryland. And so it's a big help there, and it brings Bethesda and Tyson's together in an area where we can have bus transit. That's just huge for our area economy. And so I just wanted to announce those two things. But right now, before we have our presentation and I turn it over to Delegate McQuinn to introduce our speaker from the GRTC to talk about transit passengers who are difficult to serve, underserved. I'd like to introduce Stephen Edwards, who is the new head of the Port of Virginia. He comes to us with vast experience. We had breakfast this morning and went over a number of transportation related issues as to how the port operates, but we don't have a supply chain problem, particularly in Virginia, I think, thanks to the great work that the folks there are doing. So I wanted to give him about 10 minutes to talk a little bit about him joining the team here in Virginia and what some of his challenges and needs are. So with that, Stephen, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon. I haven't met most of you because when you come to Virginia to come to work, I came during COVID. So you will appreciate that meeting people was not exactly first on the agenda. We did it a lot of it virtually, but I've been in the seat at the head of the Port of Virginia for 11 months now. I came in January of this year. And just by background, I came from 3 years in California operating marine terminals, 5 years in Vancouver, British Columbia, operating the largest gateways in Canada. And prior to that, also landed in the States. You can tell I have a British accent, landed in the States in 1997 in New Jersey, when our family decided we had to school our children here, and we've then gone through the process of visas, green cards to citizenship that a number of people follow. So I just thought for the 10 minutes, I will talk a little bit about how the Port of Virginia is doing and how we're doing relative to others, so we get a good feel for as a whole. I think you probably are all aware, because everybody is aware, there is a supply chain problem in the United States. And we know it because it's on the front page of every every newspaper, or it's on 60 Minutes. And that has presented a very significant opportunity to Virginia because we are managing to perform better than those people who are in trouble. By background with the port as a whole, so far this year, calendar year, we are up 27% on volume. That makes us the fastest growing port of major port in the nation. And it's important to take a view to say, what is our growth 21 over 20, and what is our growth 21 over 2019? Because the decline in business from COVID in 2020, Virginia took more of a reduction initially than some of the other locations, but we have more than recovered that position. So our growth compared to our East Coast competitors of 21 versus 19, we're about 2% higher on the growth scale than they are. And 2021 over 2020, we are a good 5 percentage points so far above in our growth scale. So volumes are strong, and volumes have been strong on all segments that we would hope them to be on imports primarily, but also on exports. And while the value of the port in terms of economic value, a lot of that is on the import side, we did take actions in February and March this year to protect the exporters so they didn't get caught up in the supply chain problems that we have in the nation. So we took a lot of actions to make sure their freight could continue to move through the port and not get caught in any problems that importers not moving freight would get caught in. So we're pleased that we're up 14% on exports so far this year, and that makes us the fastest growing export port. On the supply chain as a whole, and I said other sectors are up 27% as a whole, we're up 29% on imports, we're up 31% on rail. So if we think to some of the prior infrastructure that has been built, such as the Heartland Corridor, or some of the other improvements that have handled in the past, they are paying dividends. On the overall supply chain situation, it's not going to change in the short term because COVID is creating a number of problems internationally. It is not just domestically. And we see it constantly with factory shutdowns around the world. You will see China shut factories for a period, reopen. That means a surge of freight after surge of freight after lag of freight after lag of freight. And the same is going on in Vietnam. And now we are seeing Europe considerably shut down again. So we are going to see this ebb and flow of surges of freight for the foreseeable future. The other thing that has really happened is within 1 year, the e-commerce giants achieved their 5-year plan, which was to grow their business by 100%. And I wouldn't doubt that everybody in this room in the course of this holiday season will buy the majority of their goods with a point and a click and not go to a brick and mortar store. That is a different import supply chain than we as the Port of Virginia may have been set up for. If you think through supply chains, there are a number of supply chains who try and avoid California for very good reasons. And they will bring their freight to East Coast ports. So we enjoy, as a port, the support of people such as Walmart in James City or Target stores in Suffolk. But the e-commerce has always tended to come through the West Coast so that when it comes from the route of shortest distance, they can then decide where to send the goods to. Is the demand in Dallas? Is the demand in Memphis? Is the demand in Chicago? It's a late retail decision as to where to send. The analogy I've often used is when I was doing economics, it was, do you make your ice cream in the winter or do you wait till the summer to see if strawberry is selling or chocolate is selling before you make the ice cream? And that's the retail chain. So a lot of the surge of freight through the West Coast has been transload coming into the country and then being transloaded to come onto the East Coast. There is a significant opportunity ahead of us to help that come to the East Coast. And with that opportunity for Virginia to be part of that solution. Where we have succeeded compared to the Southern California ports, or for that matter, compared to Georgia, and that in our business is significant because Georgia has been the fastest growing gateway on the East Coast in the last 10 years, is the modernization that we've undertaken at the Virginia International Gateway Terminal in Portsmouth and at the Norfolk International Terminal in Norfolk, the first half of that. And that modernization is largely the semi-automation and densification of our terminals. So if we think through a pandemic scenario, we had very significant support from both Norfolk and Portsmouth to get our workforce vaccinated. We were early on the vaccination schedule. Port workers were largely fully vaccinated by the end of February. That is well ahead of any other state who were still scrambling in later months. But the other factor that's important is as the supply chain has been messed up, if you're setting up your port operations to receive ships in the order ABC, but they turn up BCA, which is invariably what's happening at the moment, we operate at about 18% on schedule, then you have to have a means and a mechanism to reorganize the cargo constantly. And in a conventional historic terminal operation, you would need to deploy more and more labor. And essentially what's happening in other ports is they've burnt through their labor force very quickly. You can't scale up fast enough. And we've been able to deploy automation to actually reorganize that warehousing capability of the port. So going from ABC to BCA has not been such a heartache to us. We have kept our workforce fully employed through this period. And in taking that big increase in business, we've been able to drive quite a lot of those results to the bottom line because we've been able to do it through a largely fixed cost structure. So we've been able to take the disruption income of storage, and therefore our financial results are also ahead of where we would hope them to be, more and by quite a margin more than our volume increase. And that is what you would expect from a hockey stick type of earnings through a fixed cost structure. I believe the real opportunity for Virginia is we have about 13.5% market share of the East Coast. So if we think Maine through Miami, about 13.5%. That makes us the 5th largest containerized port in the country, possibly moving. We're in a battle with Houston between 5th or 6th, and Houston is a big winner of diversion away from California. As you'd expect, there's quite a lot of business developing in Texas as well. But the opportunity now is the disruption in California, and for the first time ever, really disruption in Georgia, allows us to attract more and more developers and more transload and logistics businesses into the Commonwealth. But we do have a very, say, spotty record in winning that business. And we have been slower than Georgia or slower than South Carolina in attracting that business. So I see our opportunity now to really work with Suffolk, with the Isle of Wight, with Chesapeake, with Portsmouth, to actually bring more and more port-centric business that comes into the ports, is translated quickly to then go on into the domestic markets. We are operating at 99.5% warehouse capacity right now. And therefore the ability to build capability quickly will allow us to grow quicker and grab that market opportunity. So that's an area we're focused on, in bringing those private developers into our state very quickly. I think we will have some successes. I think we will have more and more success. But that is a critical area for us to further develop as a whole. So overall, I think the report from the port at the moment is we're doing well. We have an opportunity to do much better because the market is in our favor, because we have this differentiation between our performance and our competitors' performance as a whole. And I do believe, Chairman, for the first, we are being now recognized in not only our local press, but also in the trade press and also by the logistics companies, that we have this differentiation opportunity in front of us. And I believe some of our host communities, whether that's Portsmouth or Suffolk, also recognize that opportunity. But we've got to move with speed to grab that market opportunity.
Stephen, thank you very much. I think we have time for 2 questions.
I do have a question.
Senator Favolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Steve. I'm just curious, do you form partnerships with other sort of transit groups or transport groups just to ensure that you can move things as quickly as you need to, or you can make adjustments because you have this nice map of partners around the East Coast?
So, Chairman, to answer the question, I think the best way to look at it is, yes, we do. We have partnerships with the trucking community. We have operating partnerships with both railroads, Norfolk Southern and CSX. So to give you an example of maintaining freight fluidity, if a railroad is metering Chicago because Chicago's out of capacity, we will be in discussion with them on how much freight we can buffer through the port at a given time. If they were to come to us and say, you need to meet at Chicago and Louisville at the same time, we'll say that can't happen. And that's the partnership of a relay of a supply chain that we are working closely with them to say, okay, we can buffer Louisville for a few days. Now we can buffer Chicago. The other one in our management structure is the asset that is under the most pressure nationally is actually the chassis, the intermodal chassis the containers sit on, because dwell times at warehouses are so high. We operate the chassis pool in the Port of Virginia. It's unique to Virginia. We're the only port that does that. South Carolina has opted to follow us with theirs. So what we have managed to do is operate that as high as 97% utilized without shorting the trade by working with our own operations, being able to say, if you want to open the terminal on a Saturday to receive back equipment from a Walmart, by example, to free up equipment for a Monday start, we have that holistic picture. We're not fighting 13 different actors. We're working within our own group, and our COO is able to make those calls. And that has been a major differentiator between us and Southern California.
Great. Another question, Delegate Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Edwards, thank you for being here with us today and the information you always provide. Knowing that West Rock Corporation, Allegheny County, is one of the largest exporters out of our Port of Virginia, do you see an intermodal yard west of Front Royal as to being an advantage for moving freight more logistically and not off of our highways? Is that worthy of consideration?
Chairman, to answer that question, I would say yes. Any intermodal yard to the west is worthy of consideration. The challenge is, while there is undoubtedly the export demand from the west, is finding that import match. So the question we are really trying to work through is, by example, if we were to talk about, let's talk about Bristol as an example. Would the opportunity of combining Louisville import freight and then empty staging back through somewhere on the western network of the Norfolk Southern be of value to us? There are some industrial sites available for that, so we're not blind to it. I couldn't tell you we have a business plan to do so today, but it is something worthy to actually go and identify those businesses. And some of those businesses that can use such a facility are actually also out of state, say Eastern Tennessee type businesses that currently move through South Carolina as well, that could then be attracted to come through our gateway.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have asked for $150 million to be placed into site preparation for a lot of these kinds of facilities. And what we know from the administration at this time, I've been bugging Secretary Ball and to ask him what's in the budget, and he says it's substantial. So I don't know if that means the full 150 or not, but we'll find out. Let me thank you very much, Stephen, for being here. Welcome to Virginia, and we wish you Godspeed. We've made just tremendous strides with our port over the past 8 years, and it's combined with Dulles and the Silver Line improving their economic picture there. Those are the two anchors of our economic development future in Virginia, and we appreciate your work and those of all the folks in who contribute to the port's success. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Very good. And now I'd like to turn it over to Delegate McQuinn to introduce our next presenter.
Pleasure this evening of presenting an individual who moved to Richmond in 2009 to serve as the 6th CEO of GRTC, the first female to serve and in the company's history. And we are certainly delighted to have her there. She has 25 years of experience, and she's come to Richmond and been very engaged in the community, but also helping us all to understand the magnitude of the transportation minuses and plus. And so without going into a lot of detail, other than that she's a Virginian. She was raised in Hampton and have been here and there across the country, serving in many leadership capacities. So at this moment, at this time, I would like to present to each of you no one other than Mrs. Julia Timms.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. If we can get the presentation back to slide 1. Thank you so much. And I think this is going to work for me. I might need you to advance for me, please. So just to level set a little bit about mobility, I tend to prefer to speak about transit in terms of mobility, not in terms of transit, because when we're looking at how people move, when we talk about transit, people think about 40-foot buses and GRTC, and transit's much more than that. Thank you. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So when we talk about mobility, just to level set, mobility, I think, is a pretty obvious term that it's about moving people. But on the next slide, it's more than that. On slide 3, it's about the ability to move people socially as well. That when we're looking at just moving people from one place to another physically, and we're thinking about mobility connections, we also have to think about what transportation means to their ability to move for their health, their welfare, and their prosperity, not just in the urban environment, but in the suburban and rural environments too. When you don't have physical transportation, you limit the ability to have economic or social mobility in those same communities. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at the prosperity of any community, the ability to have that social mobility is directly tied to the ability to have physical mobility. Thank you. Nope.
So sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. Next slide, please. And that's the foundation for this conversation, is to really look at, when we look at transit, we would look at mobility, and we would look at transportation and roads, we really need to focus on our communities and our people and how we're investing in our businesses and our communities, especially those who are in critical need of connectivity, our seniors, our essential workforce, our youth, and those who need that level of connection to healthcare and to education and to food. Next slide, please. When you think about transit and you think about transportation, you think about cars. What we know that people need is that safe, well-connected, easy, multimodal. And when you have all those together the same way we have our cars, we know that transit and mobility is effective. Next slide, please. Mobility connects people. And this is the key point. If you're going to have mobility that provides for the welfare and the wealth of our businesses and our citizens, you have to have the ability of people to connect to housing and to jobs, education, healthcare, food. It's not just one, it's all of those. Most of us take for granted our cars. When you don't have a car, these things now become key determinants to your ability to gain wealth and to get out of communities, or to raise up communities that have had that underinvestment. Next slide, please. To level set about what GRTC is, I'm going through these very quickly. By the way, I understand that I'm between you and rush hour, so I'm going to try and get through this quickly. GRTC is the 3rd largest transit agency in the state. We serve an area of over 1 million people. Our ridership serves an area of about 500,000 people. I haven't seen the newest census data, so this might change. In 2018, we did launch an award-winning bus rapid transit system, the Pulse. And the same time, we did a system redesign of all of our local buses to connect people to jobs. The expansion of that and the implementation of that in 2018 was actually laid the groundwork for a conversation at the local and state level to put more investment into transit, because it was so incredibly successful. We now have the CVTA, Central Virginia Transportation Authority, that provides a certain amount of dedicated funding to transit that's building on that growth of the mobility network. Next slide, please. This is a small video that really highlights the beauty of the Pulse system. Next slide, please. Oops. Yeah. So the beauty of the Pulse again is that it does all those things we think about when we think about good mobility. We think about connecting to schools, connecting to healthcare, connecting to jobs, connecting to entertainment, frequent, reliable service that's comfortable, connecting in a downtown area that's highly dense. These are very productive transportation routes. Next slide, please. Now, when you also look at it, not only are they in dense areas, there are areas that connect with good platforms. The platform is located up above the street level. It's level boarding. It's easy fare payment when we had fares. It's out of the elements. It's comfortable. It's well lit. It feels secure. You have signage to know when that next bus comes. And the buses come every 10 minutes during peak service. You don't have to think about it. You can just get on it. And that's good transit service. When this was put out, next slide, please. Again, don't worry about looking at this, I'll just describe it. The property values along the Pulse corridor along Broad Street, we're in the billions of dollars at a kind of a linear growth. During the period when the Pulse was put into place, we started to see an accelerated increase in land use value along that corridors. We also had the economic development teams in both Enrico and in Richmond show that there were businesses specifically coming to the Pulse corridor because of that transit line and that ability to connect people to jobs so readily. Now, of course, the dotted lines are my fun extrapolation. You can't do that with data, but it was fun. Next slide, please. So it was a success and it was held up across the country as a success. That bottom one, the long line, is home to work. The system does exactly what it was meant to do, connect people from their homes to work. At a time in 2018 across the country where transit was dropping ridership by double digits across the country, GRTC was increasing ridership by double digits because of the realignment, because of the Pulse, and because of the investment that was put into the system. Yes, ma'am.
Started this pilot, I guess, maybe it's permanent where they're not charging for bus tickets for bus rides. So I'm wondering, did you in some way massage your rate schedule to get more ridership, or did you leave the rate schedule the same and you got more ridership simply because it was needed?
So in 2019 is when I was hired. This happened in 2018. And when I was interviewed by the board before they hired me, I actually had that exact same question. What did you do to manipulate these numbers?
Right.
Because there's no way. The truth is that when I dug into the numbers, they had, I think, a 1 week period where it was zero fares, where we saw a spike and it came back down. They had a partnership with VCU that helped to bring the ridership together, that helped that. But month after month, with no change in fares, with no change in anything other than the structure of the system and the implementation of frequent capacity, high capacity, quality transit, we continue to see those double-digit increases month over month over month, while others were decreasing. But I had the same
You
question.
looked at that.
I did. I
Okay.
was like, "There's no way that can be the truth," and I was glad to be wrong. I couldn't have been gladder. But what you also see is that it's really focused around people who live next to those lines,
Right.
within a few blocks. You can't expect people to walk a mile to transit. You can expect them to walk a few blocks. If you have a very good transportation network that's very pedestrian friendly in a very urbanized environment, you might start seeing those increased walk times of half a mile, 3/4 of a mile. Beyond that, it's not there. But you do see that also on the other, that people were using transit to go to school, to go shopping, but that wasn't the primary purpose. It was really focused on getting people from work, home, and back again. Next slide, please. Then COVID hit. And we didn't call our riders essential and the essential workforce until COVID. But when COVID hit, we learned a lot about who was actually riding and who didn't need to ride. We asked people, don't ride transit, stay home, telework, only use the bus if you have to, if you have an essential need, otherwise please stay home. What we saw is we have paratransit, which is the on-demand service for people who have limited access to transit. They might have a physical or a mental disability, and we provide that service. BRT is the Pulse. The Express, those are the ones that go from the suburban to the rural. And local, that's our local bus service throughout the network that was redesigned. What's really compelling here is that you probably heard across the industry when COVID hit, there was a 90 to 95% drop in ridership across the country. We had that too in Express. What you don't see in the media is that this is similar to what was also happening across the country, where local buses weren't depressed. It was the Express service that was dropped so much because people could telework. They didn't have to use it if they were had an Express type job. If they had a white collar job, they could stay home. They abandoned transit to stay home as they were asked to do. But local bus riders could not do that. So these numbers show May of 2019, a year before COVID, and May of 2020, right when COVID was hitting us the hardest and before testing was available. And our local bus service was only dropped about 22%. Next slide, please. Now, this is hard to see, so I'll walk through it very, very quickly. This goes to July of 2019, July of 2020, and July of 2021, looking at the BRT, local, and express. Those 3 points are really important because 2019 was pre-COVID. July of 2020 is when we had COVID testing. July of 2021 is when we had ready accessibility of the vaccine. Express service is still down. It has not recovered. BRT is starting to recover a little bit as people are starting to come back downtown. Local bus dropped a little bit, but is back to normal numbers, 0.5% of what it was pre-COVID. Because our essential workforce were using it to get to and from work. They were stocking the toilet paper when it wasn't stocked out. They were going to become our nurses. The doctors were still using it to get to work. The people, when we were going and using our door dashes for food that was coming to our door, these were people that were cooking our food and cleaning up the dishes. These are people who were going to the pharmacies and delivering our healthcare and our medications. The essential workforce didn't have the opportunity to stay home. They continued to ride transit. But what we found is not only were they riding transit, they were riding it more, because now we went zero fare. Thank you to the state, we were able to take fares away and provide a reduction of barriers to access. When people get on board a bus, they get on the front door, they pay their fares, and they have a touch point and a cough point on top of our operators. The easiest way to maintain service was to ask them to board through the back door of the bus, remove that fares, and protect our operators, the people that were driving it, from people riding. So that separation of zero fares was critical to keep our service intact through the worst of COVID. And it maintains itself as critical now. I'll go about that in a few minutes. But what we found is that the same people who are in Express, they weren't really paying for fares pre-COVID. They're not paying for them now because they're not riding. Pre-COVID, they weren't paying because they were actually being subsidized through their employer. They had employer paid passes, or they were being subsidized by the university. The people that were paying for transit were the local bus riders, the people who were making $10,000 or less a year in their household incomes. The middle line that says pre-COVID trips mode household income, that biggest one. The blue is below 10,000. The next one, orange, is households that were below 25,000. The vast majority of people that were riding transit through COVID on our local bus were predominantly African Americans, people of color with very low income who were previously buying passes by cash or one day, the most regressive form of fare payment. They didn't have the money or the resources to buy the 30-day pass, and they didn't have jobs or employers that pay for the passes for them. This taught us a lot about who we were serving and how we were serving them pre-COVID and post-COVID. Next slide, please. Not only that, but even though we were asking people to stay home, we saw that our bus service continued to remain very, very high on the local service. We had people, when we were asking them to stay 10 people on a bus or less, we had 30 people on a bus or more because they still had to get to work. We were looking at where they were riding, what lines, those lines that had that 10-minute or that 15-minute frequency that were within very close proximity to housing and jobs, that were in economically distressed areas. That's our essential workforce, and that's who we continue to serve through COVID. These are the people who are also benefiting from the zero fare. When they weren't putting the fare in the fare box, they were then able to use that same money to get their diabetes medication, to help take care of their children, to get to and from the educational resources or daycare, to get their food, to make multiple trips, where in the past they might be able to make a trip to work and to home. Now they were making trips to work, to the store to get groceries, to the pharmacy to get their medication, to get their vaccinations, and to get back home. They could never do that before. Next slide, please. So this is going to take a little bit of a dark turn to show you the equity of our essential workforce and how we treat transit, the local bus rider. You saw how we treat the Pulse, and that is a high premium value service that we need much more of, but we need it throughout the service. The first slide is Mary. Mary was experiencing homelessness. Now, this isn't a transit issue. This is a social issue that finds itself needing transit to address it, because when we have homeless in our communities and there's nowhere for them to go, they tend to find their way to our bus stops and to our bus shelters. And so transit now needs to address these issues. Apologies for anyone with a sensitive stomach, but you can imagine what you're seeing with Mary is exactly what you think you're seeing with Mary. The next one is a gentleman who was sleeping on the Pulse because, again, that's where he could find shelter. And if you can hit next, there's a video. One of my operators took that not so long ago. This is how people experience transit at nighttime. Next slide, please. I'll try and speed through this. I know I'm running out of time here. Our downtown transfer center. Yes, ma'am. In the past, that would have been what would happen is we would, we meaning the transit industry, would ask police to come and remove them. We are now not doing that any longer, which is a further slide, but I'll address now, is that by working with social services and for the police are actually working to have new community involvement officers that are helping to find, partnering with us when we identify people in need and people in crisis, finding mental health services and housing services to get them help. So working in coordination with our other agencies and around the city, we're able to get people served. This is an example of the downtown transfer center that we treat. You wouldn't expect to see this kind of infrastructure where you park your personal car, and yet this is where we have people transfer at midnight. Next slide, please. When people do have to use transit to get to those essential resources, a lot of times they're only allowed to bring 2 bags onto a bus because they become projectiles. If you have to go to the store to get your groceries and you have to go 2 hours to get to the store and get back home and you're having cans, transit becomes a barrier to your ability to get food. Walter Watson is a U.S. Army vet. This is a picture. I met him as I was going to work one day. He has 1 leg because of his service to our country. He was on his way to the VA and on 1 hourly service. This was right after we had a ice storm. It was 45-degree weather out. He did refuse a ride that time. I gave him a ride later, a true gentleman. But he has to stand literally in a ditch in freezing weather to get to the VA for his service on a bus that comes hourly and may or may not show up because of workforce shortages. Next slide. When we say we have people standing in ditches, we have people standing in ditches. The first slide, you can kind of see the ditch. If someone has a wheelchair, in order to get from the sidewalk to the bus, they actually have to go through a ditch. The other side is during that storm event that where we had freezing weather, people had to stand on that snow route next to freezing roads, risking their lives as cars went by also on those freezing roads in order to get to work and to get back home again. Next slide. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure that you'll hear this one. This is one of our operators. When we look at the underinvestment in our transportation network, again, these aren't transit issues. These are transportation mobility issues. What you see is this is near Willow Lawn area. The storm events that we're seeing through climate change are flooding our roads. Now they have a shelter, the people riding transit have a shelter, but if you watch for a second, you can see how effective that shelter is. Next slide, please. The other issue that we have with transit and mobility and connectivity when we think about how we serve is, I hate to point this one out, but this is when businesses, when public resources make decisions for where they place essential needs, this is the registrar's office in the city of Richmond, a lot of times they don't think about mobility and our citizens first, how they get there. They have other priorities. In this case, the registrar moved its location for a variety of good reasons, but contacted us after the fact, and we could not get a 40-foot bus there, which basically disenfranchised any voter who wanted to get early voting to this location, could not use a bus to get there. Next slide. And what happens when you have this level of historic underinvestment generation after generation is you end up with civil unrest that results in the burning of a bus. It might be hard to see in this picture, the big one, but there are actually 3 buses in this picture. 2 of them are GRTC local service buses and 1 is a Pulse bus. It is the Pulse bus that burned. Next slide, please. When we think about our investments in transit and we think about our investments in mobility, if we always think about it in terms of the infrastructure of the BRT and the roads and the rails, we're always going to get what we've always got. There is a good news story to this. Next slide. I'm going to start really talking fast here, I promise. We talked about the 0 fares. GRTC went 0 fares because of COVID, but we're maintaining 0 fares because of everything we learned during COVID. When we looked at who was paying and how they were paying, our net fare box recovery after all the expenses was approximately $5.5 million. If you look at Richmond local, Enrico local, Chesterfield local, Bi-Mode local, it's about $5.2 million. Now, we already established that the majority of people riding local are low income, very impoverished households. We are asking the people who can least afford to pay the most for transit. Now, people then come back and say, well, have the express riders pay, have BRT riders pay. Well, express was only paying $500,000, BRT 1.6, and the most of that was being paid by the business community. In order for us to go 0 fare completely, we're developing partnerships with that same business community and agencies to backfill what we would lose and to keep us level set moving forward so that the people who need transit most can afford it. And we are reducing those barriers to voting and to healthcare and to recreation and to get to jobs. Yes, ma'am. Okay, next slide, please. We're also putting a significant amount of investment into our shelters and to our sidewalks, but for most transit agencies, we do not own the right of way where sidewalks need to be put. We don't have the ability to put them there, so we have to have the partnerships with our local municipalities, with our VDOTs, to be able to put those sidewalks in, because even if we have the autonomous electric vehicles, if people can't get to that vehicle because the sidewalk infrastructure isn't there, they still don't have access to that technology. We need to increase the actual accessibility for people who have different abilities and the sidewalk infrastructure throughout our entire community. Next slide, please. When we look at downtown transfer centers, we need to think about something new. It's not a place to hide and push away, but a place that we can do multimodal investment. We can look and leverage, like Charlotte is doing, the superstructure above a transit center to put it on the tax rolls to help pay for the transit center itself. In Charlotte, their transit center was put in place a decade or so ago when there was nothing around it. And people say, well, no one will invest near transit. Right now, it is catty corner to the Ritz-Carlton 5-star hotel and right across the street from their stadium. And they're looking to have that a private investor come in to elevate the use of that while still maintaining that transit connectivity. Next slide, please. When we think about transit, we also need to think about how we measure it. It's not about having a full bus. Empty buses can be productive buses at certain points in the line. When you look at these total dollars per passenger about how much it costs to run our core system, those core systems we talked about for the essential workers, they're still significantly less than an Uber ride. And they have approximately that 10 passengers per trip and on average, which means sometimes the bus is empty and sometimes it's full, but that is a very productive bus, very much more productive than you'll see on roads. Next slide. But not every bus line is like that. And we as a transit industry need to reassess where the 40-foot bus is not working, where the costs are higher, the ridership is lower. We need to look at on-demand service. We need to look at the innovation of an autonomous vehicle or an Uber or Lyft model, something else that can fill that gap. Next slide. And where we have extreme costs, for example, when COVID hit and we had our express buses drop ridership dramatically, the costs per rider went down to less than a person per trip. $100 a person is not sustainable. We need to look at van pools and other forms of connectivity to make sure that our resources are financially working for us, getting people to work, and we're not wasting them arbitrarily. Next slide. A lot of people say, well, when we talk about frequency versus coverage, what should we do? Because people need higher frequency to trust it. We need that 10-minute service. But if you put all your resources in a 10-minute service, there are people who are further out, who are in the suburban or rural areas who might get cut off, who are lower income and need that connectivity. The question then becomes, when we have this historic investment in transportation and we're putting billions of dollars into road, why can't we put a few hundred more millions of dollars into that connectivity, into this broad range of mobility services so that our seniors and suburbans can get the healthcare, and our other communities who are being pushed out of the urban core because of some of the costs of housing can get back in to get to jobs. There are ways to do this equitably and sustainably. Next slide, please. Because when you do that, you can actually get people. The blue dots are access, 45 minutes to jobs. When you put more coverage in, you get a little bit. When you put more frequency in, you get a lot more impact to a lot more people, and businesses will come to your region, just like they did with Pulse, when you invest in transit. Next slide, please. This is the end of it, I promise. Mary has a home. She has mental health resources. Walter's going to get his shelter. We're working on that now. And Martin, you didn't hear about Martin, but he's a single father. He's keeping custody of his son because of zero fares and his ability to use transit to take care of his son and get to work when he has to work fewer hours for that care. But he doesn't have to put those resources into the fare box. He can put it into the care of his son. Last slide. Because when we invest in our communities, not our infrastructure, but our communities, and then the infrastructure follows, we will have prosperous communities. We will have a boat that rises for everyone. And we will look at that social and economic mobility as well as our physical mobility. Thank you so much for your time, and I apologize for going over.
Thank you, Julie. That was fabulous. You guys are doing a great job. What a complicated, challenging world you live in, and trying to get people around. But the most important thing really for economic growth for people is being able to get to where you need to go. So that's great. Thank you very much. We had a question from Delegate Wyatt.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Julie, I know the Board of Directors recently voted to extend the free ridership through the end of June, so that the $5.8 million that y'all received from CARES money, and I think VCU gives you about 1.2 to 1.5 to cover their students.
Yes, sir.
Is that enough funding to get you to June?
Yes, sir.
For free ridership? And
yes, and actually, I'm very thankful that the state Commonwealth Transportation Board, as well as this body, worked to amend the TRIPS program that is being managed by DRPT to allow for a pilot program of zero fares or low income fares to be implemented. We have applied for that for the next 3 years after it, to be able to maintain a study of fare services, what the costs would be, whether or not zero fares is sustainable, whether or not we can get partnerships with the business community to maintain zero fares, how much that generates back, or whether or not we need to look at a different kind of fare model. But we're very hopeful that we will be able to be successful in getting that, and we'll stay zero fares while we study it for many years, for another 3 years. But it is something that I do believe, based on my conversations directly with the business community, I believe it is sustainable without doing it on the backs of taxpayers.
Madam Chair.
Delegate
follow-up.
Wyatt.
I guess in that dark day that you referred to of May 28th, and I went down there because when our Hanover County provided mutual aid to dumpster fires, and
yes, sir.
And then our battalion chiefs were sprayed with pepper spray because they were attacking fire and EMS. And so many of the businesses that have closed along Broad Street now do, I guess in time, if once Richmond City Police kind of gets back going in the right direction, they will, I assume the ridership should increase, hopefully by summer or as the economy opens back up.
Ridership is increasing pretty dramatically on the Pulse corridor right now already. VCU is returning back. Businesses are opening. We saw a very large increase right in August, right before the new variant hit. I think that when the variant hit, a lot of people then went back home again. The biggest issue right now is how we're dealing with COVID and how people feel safe to go back to work. But we do have a lot of people who are driving it, riding transit, and actually, I hate to say this, I wish they would ride it less. I am very concerned because sometimes we have people packed on, and it can be very difficult for our operators who are very burnt out to constantly remind people to put their masks on while on the bus. And there's a lot of anger and frustration throughout the entire community. And we're seeing not on transit, but everywhere. People's tolerance for confrontation is way down. And I just, COVID can't end soon enough.
Great.
I-
Thank you, Senator Favola.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a concept and I think, I don't know if it'll work in the Richmond, the greater Richmond area, but you can apply a business, I guess you have to designate it first as a business district, and then you can apply a tax which could be dedicated to transportation. Now, a lot of the language evolves around infrastructure, but I think if you were creative, you could probably figure out an ongoing way to provide the bus without an increase in fares if you could work it into a business district.
Yes, ma'am. There have been conversations with the city of Richmond early on in COVID, pre-COVID, about whether or not that would be sustainable within the city and within the region. I believe Kansas City was also one that did a similar model where they had the downtown, every business had a certain amount, like 50 cents per employee per year, something ridiculously low that provide for the sustainability of zero fares. We have, thanks to the state, if we do are successful in our application for the pilot program, we will have several years to explore that and find a sustainable model.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Julie, thank you again. Any other comments or questions? When I'm at home, I need to wait till my wife gets home before I can access Netflix. I'm not very good with IT, but DJ is, and he was here all day and he made it flawless. And thank you, DJ. And secondly, I'd like to thank Sean Sukol from the Senate Clerk's Office who put this all together, did a fabulous job. So thank you. If there's nothing else, going once, going twice, committee will rise.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's meeting is.